This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. In the north, Germanicus eventually defeated the Germans and recovered 2 of the 3 standards that Varus's legions had lost. Germanicus was rewarded for his efforts with a triumph on May 26, 17 CE. All 5 children, including the 4-year-old Gaius, rode with him in his chariot for that triumph. The following year, Germanicus became consul for the 2nd time and was given authority over the provinces of the east, in particular Asia Minor. This effectively meant he was heir apparent, as the same assignment had been given to Agrippa by Augustus, and then given to Tiberius after Agrippa's death. The appointment was almost equivalent to being adopted as heir. Germanicus went right to work and sailed east, accompanied by his wife Agrippina and their son Gaius. On the way, Agrippina gave birth to Julia Livilla on the island of Lesbos. She was named after Livilla, the sister of Germanicus. Germanicus negotiated several diplomatic wins for the empire, most especially with Artabanus, the Roman-supported king of the Parthians, in 18 CE. But while Germanicus was in the east, he tussled with Piso, the governor of Syria, who had 4 legions under his control. Antioch on the Orontes, the 3rd largest city in the empire after Rome and Alexandria, had been named by Pompey as the capital of the then new province of Syria in 63 BCE. At one point, Aretas, king of the Nabateans, invited both Germanicus and Piso, accompanied by their respective wives, Agrippina and Plancina, to a dinner. Aretas presented weighty golden crowns to Germanicus and his wife Agrippina, but gave Piso and his wife smaller, lesser crowns. Piso said that the guest of honor was the son of a Roman emperor, not a Parthian king, and then pushed his own smaller crown aside and launched into an extended diatribe against luxury. Germanicus responded to the tirade with grace, comity, and a general silence. But the incident revealed Piso's jealousy and raised Germanicus's awareness of this potential threat. Germanicus then went to Egypt, which earned him a strong rebuke from Tiberius, who reminded him that as Egypt was an imperial rather than a senatorial province, no officer was to enter it without express permission from the emperor. This was a practice that Augustus himself had initiated. Germanicus would certainly have known about this injunction, so it's unclear why he visited Egypt without permission from Tiberius. It wasn't the sort of thing that could be done clandestinely. Germanicus returned to Syria only to face a frosty Piso, who, with his wife Plancina, left the province for Rome. Not long afterwards, Germanicus fell ill, whether because of a disease picked up in Egypt or Syria or something more sinister. Germanicus suspected that he was being poisoned by agents of Piso, so he wrote a scathing letter to Piso, essentially saying that if he died, it would be Piso's fault. As Germanicus lay sick and close to death, he spoke with his wife Agrippina and asked her to forget her pride and submit to the cruelty of fortune. He said that when she ultimately made her way back to Rome, she should avoid provoking any of those who were more powerful than her by competing with them for power, namely Tiberius. Germanicus passed away on October 10th, 19 CE, at the age of only 34, and many suspected it was due to his being poisoned. Though he did not know it, that very day, Livilla, Germanicus's sister, for whom his recent daughter was named, gave birth to twins. Even though Agrippina herself was ill, with perhaps the same poison or illness that took Germanicus's life, she arranged for her husband's funeral to be held in the main square in Antioch, Syria, and did not cremate Germanicus's body. She wanted the people to see the effects of the poison, but when the body was cremated, it was said that Germanicus's heart, like the bones, did not burn, which was understood to be a clear sign of poison. The suspected poisoner, a local by the name of Martina, who was friendly with Plancina, was ordered to present herself in Rome on charges of poisoning Germanicus. Martina died in Brundisium on the way back to Rome, whether of illness or some other cause was unknown. Agrippina and her children, including 4-year-old Agrippina the Younger, 7-year-old Gaius, and the others, landed in Brundisium as well, and staged a procession to Rome with the ashes of Germanicus. Crowds lined the roads to catch a glimpse of the mourning family. Agrippina's political sensibilities were highly attuned, and by the time she and her retinue entered Rome via the Via Appia, the crowds were nearly inconsolable. She went into the city and placed the urn in the mausoleum of Augustus at about midday, when all could see. For Americans, we might think of the images of JFK's assassination and the later days of Jackie Kennedy and her young children saluting the casket. The feelings stirred up in Americans at that time might be something similar to those stirred up in the Roman people upon seeing Agrippina and her children's respect and piety for Germanicus, slain husband and father. But these public displays infuriated Tiberius, and he would never forgive Agrippina. Piso was accused as the mastermind of the entire plot and put on trial. There were rumors that Plancina had been in communication with Livia and had only been following the Augusta's desires in poisoning Germanicus. Tiberius deferred the trials to the Roman Senate, but before the trial was concluded, Piso committed suicide. Plancina was found guilty and sentenced to death, but that sentence was vacated by Tiberius. Even so, she too committed suicide. The Roman people had great affection for Germanicus and compared him to Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. The entire city went into mourning upon learning of his death. Soon, rumors started that Tiberius had compelled Piso to thwart Germanicus's effort in the east, and even encouraged Piso to poison him. With Germanicus dead, Agrippina accused Tiberius of having had him murdered. Tiberius responded by forbidding Agrippina from marrying ever again. Her son Gaius, Caligula, went to live with her. With Germanicus dead, that left Drusus, Tiberius's biological son, as the sole heir to the imperial throne. About this time, in 19 CE, there was a sizable Jewish presence in Rome. One particular Jewish man had been driven out of Judea due to accusations that he transgressed the Mosaic law. After making his way to Rome, he partnered with some others in an attempt to raise money for the temple in Jerusalem. They were so successful that they convinced a prominent woman, Fulvia, a convert to Judaism, to send purple and gold to Jerusalem. When they had assembled all the funds, they absconded with the treasure for themselves. Fulvia's husband, the senator Saturninus, asked for an inquiry into the matter, and when Tiberius heard of it, he expelled all Jews from Rome and sent 4,000 Jewish males to Sardinia as military conscripts. As mentioned earlier, Tiberius was assisted in managing the political and administrative affairs of the empire by Sejanus, who was named Praetorian Prefect the year after Tiberius became emperor. The Praetorian Prefect was essentially the commander of the Praetorian Guard, a high-ranking administrative official who had significant authority. Sejanus had accompanied young Gaius to Syria years earlier and was considered an effective administrator. In about 20 CE, Sejanus hoped to secure his connection to the imperial family. He betrothed his 4-year-old daughter Junilla to the 11-year-old Claudius Drusus, the son of Claudia Orgalanilla and Claudius, the same Claudius who would later become emperor and was known for being sickly quite often and clumsy even more so. However, only after a few days later, Claudius Drusus died when emulating the clumsy attributes of his father. The self-assured adolescent tossed a pear into the air and attempted to catch it in his mouth, but instead he choked on it and fell dead. Sejanus would have to ensure that his 4-year-old daughter Junilla would be betrothed to someone else. The following year, in a sign of Sejanus's growing power, he served with Drusus, Tiberius's son, as consuls together. Though Sejanus was the effective number 2, Drusus, as Tiberius's child, was the true heir apparent. Though there was a senate and it held power, true authority was in the hands of the princeps. As an example of how the treason laws were being used at the time, in the year 22, proconsul from Asia, Gaius Junius Silanus, returned to Rome. He had served as consul in 10 under Augustus and had been leading a fine career, but upon his return he was faced with accusations of maladministration, oppression, and extortion during his time as proconsul. The case against him was designed to punish. Even his slaves were tortured to reveal what they knew. Charges of treason were added, namely that he had committed sacrilege to the divinity of Augustus and contempt for the majesty of Tiberius. Treason charges had the effect of silencing anyone who might have been inclined to speak on his behalf. In the end, Silanus could see that there was little hope. He dropped his defense and relied on the mercy of the emperor. The prosecutor, praising the mercy of Tiberius, recommended that Silanus be banished to an arid Greek island of about 9 square miles. But Silanus had a sister, Torquata, a vestal virgin, and she interceded on his behalf. And here's where I'll say a little bit about the special class of women prominent and privileged in ancient Rome, the vestal virgins. They were priestesses of the cult of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and the protector of Rome. The temple of Vesta was in the heart of Rome, near the Forum, on the Via Sacra. The living quarters of the vestal virgins was adjacent to the temple, where the sacred fire burned, attended at all times by at least one priestess. Duties of the vestal virgins included keeping the sacred fire. If it were ever extinguished, that was a bad omen, signaling that doom was near. There were only 6 vestal virgins at a time, and each was chosen from a distinguished family at a young age and professed service and virginity for a period of 30 years. In return, they were given duties, honors, respect, and responsibility surpassing all women, except perhaps the empress. They were answerable to the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, who in the 1st century would have been the princeps. They were the only full-time clergy in Rome, reflecting how critically important was the cult of Vesta. When a vestal traveled, she was preceded by a lictor, basically a personal guard who cleared the way for her. She could own property, make her own will, and she could also give evidence in court without having to swear an oath. Other privileges included premium seats at the games and public spectacles. If a vestal violated her oath of virginity, she was to be buried alive in a tomb, as it was unlawful for anyone to intentionally kill a vestal, though the man who committed adultery with a vestal was to be publicly executed by the Pontifex Maximus. The vestal was seen in some ways as the incarnation of Rome itself, so her virginity was especially prized. Where she violated in that way, it was as though Rome itself had been violated. So back to the case of Silanus, the accused. Because of his sister's intervention on behalf of her brother, and due to the family name and his station, Tiberius decided to banish Silanus to a more hospitable Greek island than would have been proposed by the prosecutor. For the early 20s CE, this was a case of Roman justice and imperial clemency, influenced by the special relationship of a vestal virgin. Next time, we'll hear about the death of Drusus, Tiberius's only and favored son.